Carter gripped the armrests of her seat as the plane rolled toward the runway. At 18, she was on her first solo flight, traveling from Denver to Chicago to spend the summer with her older brother. Her stomach twisted with nervous excitement. She had flown with her parents before, but now she was alone, surrounded by strangers, their conversations a dull hum around her. Families clutched each other, business travelers tapped impatiently at laptops, and children kicked the seat in front of them, oblivious to the seriousness of takeoff. Tried to focus on the little things. The hum of engines, the way the flight attendants moved with precise, measured steps, the faint smell of jet fuel mixed with recycled air. It was her first time noticing the details in the cockpit through the small window at the front, gauges blinking, lights flickering, and pilots exchanging short phrases over headsets. Her father had taught her to watch, to pay attention to details others missed, to always stay aware. The safety demonstration began. The flight attendants' rehearsed motion seemed almost hypnotic as eyes followed every step. Buckles clicked, oxygen masks dropped and snapped back into place, emergency exits pointed out with smooth precision. Most passengers nodded politely and turned their attention elsewhere, scrolling on phones or reading magazines. But curiosity was insatiable. She read the pamphlet in her lap, memorizing emergency exits, locations of flotation devices, and instructions for evacuating in case of fire. She had always been a careful observer, and though nervous, she felt a strange calm in understanding the safety procedures. Maybe, she thought, being aware could turn fear into control. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom. "Ladies, and this is your captain speaking. We'll be taking off shortly. Weather is clear, visibility good. Sit back and enjoy the flight." The voice was calm, soothing, professional. Noticed a slight tremor in her stomach as the engines roared to life, vibrating beneath the cabin floor. The plane started moving toward the runway, gaining speed with a low, powerful hum that rattled her chest. She squeezed the armrests again, feeling the subtle push of acceleration. Around her, other passengers relaxed or chatted, some oblivious to the tension that always came with the first moments of flight. As the plane lifted from the tarmac, his eyes widened at the sight of Denver fatting below. Buildings, cars, and streets became a patchwork quilt of colors, lights, and shadows. Clouds stretched endlessly ahead, soft and thick like cotton. She clutched her pamphlet for a moment, overwhelmed by the realization of being alone in the sky, a small figure in a massive, moving machine. Her mind drifted to her father's words, "Always watch, always be aware. Knowledge is power, even when it feels like you have none." She repeated it silently, feeling a strange sense of empowerment even as butterflies danced in her stomach. The flight settled into cruising altitude. Passengers relaxed, reclining in their seats, some chatting, others closing their eyes. Flight attendants moved down the aisles with drinks and snacks. Observed them carefully, noting the efficiency and ease of their movements, their calm demeanor masking the unseen responsibilities and potential emergencies they might face. As she sipped her bottled water, she noticed a faint vibration under her seat. Most would have dismissed it as turbulence, but strained eye, developed through curiosity and her father's informal lessons, made her pause. She glanced toward the cockpit window at the front, noting the co-pilot's brief frown and the captain's eyes scanning the instrument panels. Something small but unusual was occurring. She didn't know what yet, but her instincts prickled. Hours of practice with flight simulators at home and countless stories from her father came rushing back. He had been a pilot before retirement and had taught her to read instruments, anticipate minor malfunctions, and remain calm under pressure. Kept her pamphlet open, memorizing emergency procedures with renewed attention. She noticed the subtle flicker of a light on the maintenance panel near the cockpit, a warning signal, quiet and easy to miss. The pilot spoke in low tones, words like hydraulic and system check reaching her ears. She could sense their cautious attention, a tension barely visible but undeniable. Around her, passengers continued chatting, scrolling on phones, and adjusting blankets, blissfully unaware of the minor anomaly that might grow into something more serious later. His focus extended to every detail. The engine sounds, normally a dull roar, had a slight irregularity. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear but of alertness. She leaned back in her seat, taking a slow breath. The view outside was mesmerizing. The sun reflected off clouds like liquid gold, a serene contrast to the slight unease she felt. She couldn't explain why, but she knew that paying attention now could matter later. She silently mapped the nearest exits, counted rows between herself and each emergency door, and reviewed procedures in her mind, just as her father had drilled her countless times. It was a mental checklist that calmed her, giving her a sense of readiness amidst uncertainty. Flight attendants moved past, smiling and chatting with passengers, nodded politely as they passed, her mind elsewhere, scanning, observing. A young boy a few rows ahead kicked the back of his mother's seat, breaking the quiet. She noticed how tightly she held her water bottle, small gestures of readiness mirroring her internal vigilance. She glanced at the passengers around her, some reading, some napping, some oblivious. The contrast struck her. The ordinary flight carried thousands of small risks unnoticed by most, but visible to someone paying attention. Felt a strange responsibility to remain aware, even though she was just a passenger. The quiet hum of the plane seemed louder now, almost like it was whispering for her attention. As the plane leveled out above the clouds, allowed herself a small smile. She was alone, yet fully conscious of her surroundings. The journey ahead promised excitement, new experiences and challenges, but in that moment she felt strangely capable. Little did anyone know, the lessons of observation, calmness, and preparedness she had absorbed would soon become vital. Somewhere in the plane's system, a subtle mechanical issue was waiting, unnoticed by the crew. Simply by staying alert, was unknowingly preparing herself to face a situation no ordinary passenger would ever confront. The stage was set, and her story was about to begin. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady rhythm, but's mind refused to relax. She scanned the cabin quietly, taking in the subtle motions of the passengers and crew. A young woman across the aisle was reading a magazine, oblivious to the quiet tension she alone sensed. A businessman 2 rows ahead typed furiously on his laptop, earphones in, completely disconnected. Flight attendants moved with smooth precision, offering snacks and drinks, their smiles professional, but noticed the faint crease between their brows, the slight tightness in their movements. She had learned to read these signals from her father's stories. Small details often indicated larger issues. Suddenly, a subtle vibration ran through the cabin. Most passengers shifted slightly in their seats but paid it little attention. However, felt it deep in her chest. The engine's regular purr had changed just enough to catch her trained ear. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the cockpit window, scanning the pilots' faces for any sign of trouble. The co-pilot's fingers danced over the controls with unusual speed, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between instruments. The captain, usually calm and steady, glanced at a panel twice before nodding to himself. Something was happening, and instinct screamed that it wasn't ordinary turbulence. Flight attendants approached her row, offering a small bottle of water, smiled politely, shaking her head. She didn't want to distract them, she needed to stay alert. She opened her safety pamphlet again, reviewing the emergency procedures silently in her mind. Every detail mattered now. She memorized the locations of emergency exits, the operation of oxygen masks, and the sequence for life vests. Though it seemed excessive to others, his internal voice whispered that preparation could make all the difference if something went wrong. She felt a twinge of fear, but more importantly, a surge of resolve. Being ready could save lives, she thought. She just didn't yet know how soon that readiness would be tested. A young boy across the aisle began crying, his mother trying to soothe him. A man in business attire muttered under his breath about turbulence, scrolling through his phone. Observed each reaction carefully, noting how human behavior changed under even the mildest stress. The plane shuddered again, slightly stronger this time. Her stomach dropped. She could see the small indicators on the cockpit panel, a faint red light blinking almost imperceptibly. The pilot spoke quietly, their words lost to the murmur of the cabin, but she caught phrases. Hydraulic, system check, pressure. Pulse quickened. She had never faced a real emergency, yet her mind began running scenarios, reviewing what she might do if the situation escalated. Recalled the flight simulator sessions her father had set up in the basement. He had walked her through emergency landings, brake failures, and unusual scenarios, insisting she pay attention to every detail. Now those lessons felt alarmingly real. She traced the aisle quietly, observing the passengers' seating, noting how tightly some clutched armrests, how others barely noticed. The vibrations grew slightly more pronounced, subtle enough that a casual observer would ignore them. But its attention was precise. She could almost predict the sequence of events, how the crew would respond, and what tools were available in the cockpit. Awareness, she knew, would be her greatest ally. A sudden overhead announcement cut through the cabin. The captain's voice, calm but firm, reassured passengers that all was normal, attributing the vibrations to minor turbulence. Most passengers nodded, relaxing slightly. However, felt a cold shiver of doubt. The statement didn't align with the subtle clues she had observed. The pilots' faces and the blinking indicators told a different story, one they were trying to manage quietly. She remembered her father's advice. Trust what you see, not what you hear. Instruments don't lie, and neither does instinct. His gaze flicked between the monitors and the cabin. Every instinct urged her to prepare for the worst. Around her, life continued as normal. A woman dozed lightly, headphones on, while a teenage boy scrolled through social media. Flight attendants moved efficiently, their practiced routines masking tension. Noted the contrast between ordinary life and the silent danger she could sense creeping in. The vibration grew, imperceptible to some but unmistakable to her trained eye. She imagined the consequences of ignoring it, a landing gone wrong, a system failure. She felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Part of her wanted to look away, to pretend it was just a routine flight, but she couldn't. Knowledge demanded attention. Preparedness demanded vigilance. His eyes drifted to a small panel near the cockpit window. The blinking red light persisted, subtle but consistent. Her heart beat faster. The pilots spoke again, their voices low, technical, filled with words that seemed meaningless to most passengers, but caught enough to understand. Something was off with the hydraulic system controlling the brakes. Her mind raced. She visualized emergency procedures, sequences of switches and overrides her father had demonstrated. She could see the potential disaster unfolding, the plane's descent and the long runway ahead. Panic bubbled in the cabin around her, yet she remained focused, scanning, analyzing, preparing. As the plane leveled over Illinois farmland, the co-pilot's hand brushed over a lever with hesitation. His pulse quickened. She recognized the uncertainty, the split-second decisions that pilots make under pressure. In the seat beside her, a man muttered prayers. The flight attendants were polite, calm, but noticed their subtle glances toward the cockpit. No one yet realized how critical the situation might become. She imagined herself in the cockpit, eyes on the gauges, fingers ready to act. Every second counted. Awareness, she knew, was the only chance to avoid disaster. The hours of her flight lessons, of her father's careful coaching, prepared her for this invisible storm. Reviewed emergency steps in her mind. Check systems, alert crew, follow procedure. She imagined worst-case scenarios and ran through responses, mentally rehearsing every move. The plane hummed, engine steady but carrying hidden risk. Every vibration, every shift of controls, every blink of a warning light became meaningful. Remained calm externally, yet internally she was alert, calculating. Something was coming, and she had to be ready. She didn't yet know exactly when or how, but instinct told her this flight would demand everything she had learned. The sun began to dip lower on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Passengers glanced out windows, distracted by the view. Watched too, but her attention never wavered. Every gauge, every subtle movement mattered. She felt the weight of responsibility not for herself but for everyone aboard. Somehow her knowledge, her calm observation, her father's lessons, all converged into a single certainty. She would need to act if the unexpected happened. And poised and aware, was ready. The plane continued its journey toward Chicago, the calm before the storm stretching for miles, every moment ticking closer to the moment that would test her courage. The city of Chicago grew steadily larger below the plane, a sprawling patchwork of buildings, streets, and shimmering Lake Michigan reflecting the afternoon sun. From her window, Carter could see the network of highways snaking through the city, cars crawling like ants below. Yet the beauty of the view did little to soothe her growing unease. Every instinct, every lesson her father had instilled in her, told her something was wrong. The vibrations she had noticed earlier persisted, subtle but unrelenting, a quiet warning that the smoothness of the flight was an illusion. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "We're beginning our descent into our international airport. Please ensure you are fastened and all electronic devices are turned off." Passengers nodded obediently, some excited to see the city, others tired from travel. A mother comforted her child, pointing out familiar landmarks, while business travelers tapped impatiently on laptops. Buckled her tightly, her fingers tracing the edge of her pamphlet as she mentally reviewed the emergency procedures. She had memorized the steps for evacuation, the locations of exits, and the operation of the oxygen masks. Every detail could matter. The plane began its gradual descent, engines humming steadily, flaps lowering to control speed. Leaned forward slightly, observing the pilots through the cockpit window. The co-pilot's fingers moved deliberately over the controls, while the captain's eyes flicked between instruments with tense precision. Noticed a subtle tension in the cockpit that the rest of the cabin could not see. A small light blinked repeatedly on the maintenance panel, a red signal that suggested the brake system might not respond properly. She felt her heart rate quicken but forced herself to stay calm. Panic would solve nothing, clarity and awareness could. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, checking and ensuring everyone's compliance. Noticed the small cracks in passengers' composure, a teen tapping nervously, a man shifting repeatedly in his seat, a mother whispering reassurances to her child. She mentally cataloged their positions, calculating how people might react in an emergency, which exits were nearest, and which rows could be blocked by panic. Her mind worked like a flight simulator, running through scenarios she had rehearsed countless times with her father. This wasn't just preparation, it was instinct now, sharpened by observation. The first real turbulence struck. The plane shook sharply, tossing drinks and papers into the air. Some passengers cried out, others laughed nervously, but eyes snapped to the cockpit. The pilot's hands moved faster now, adjustments more precise. The blinking red light on the panel intensified. She recognized the signals from her father's flight manuals. This was not ordinary turbulence. Something was malfunctioning, something crucial. Her pulse quickened. She didn't yet know how serious it was, but her instincts screamed that the upcoming landing would demand all her focus and knowledge. Through the window, the runway at her seemed impossibly long, yet her heart sank. In her mind, she visualized the approach, the descent angle, and the speed necessary to land safely. Every detail mattered: the flaps, the speed, the braking system. If the brakes failed, the plane could overshoot the runway. She could imagine the consequences in horrifying clarity: tires skidding, sparks flying, panic erupting in the cabin, people thrown from seats. Her hands gripped her pamphlet, but her mind worked tirelessly, plotting mental solutions. She would not be a passive passenger. She would act if needed. The co-pilot muttered a phrase too quietly for passengers to hear. Caught it, her attention sharpening. Hydraulic pressure marginal. The words were technical, but their meaning was crystal clear to her trained awareness. The brakes might not function properly. She froze for a moment, the enormity of the situation pressing down on her, yet she remained outwardly calm. Her father's lessons flooded back, reminders of drills, simulations, and emergency procedures. Panic would be contagious in the cabin, but clarity was contagious too. She silently resolved that she would be ready to guide, to act, if the need arose. As the plane lowered through the clouds, passengers admired the city below, unaware of the silent danger lurking in the machinery. His eyes shifted constantly between the monitors in the cockpit and the view of the runway. She noticed the subtle hesitations in the pilot's movements, tiny adjustments that betrayed concern. Flight attendants moved like clockwork, but could sense the underlying tension. A young boy kicked the seat in front of him, breaking the silence, and she mentally mapped his location relative to emergency exits. Everything mattered: the weight of passengers, the rows, the aisle width, the position of the nearest exit. The descent continued, engines humming in controlled power, flaps fully engaged. Rehearsed procedures in her mind, going step by step. If brakes fail, locate emergency override, alert the crew, ensure cabin awareness. She visualized herself in the cockpit, fingers on switches, guiding pilots who might panic or hesitate. Her heart pounded, but she remained calm, her focus razor-sharp. She could feel the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. She was just a passenger, yet she was already planning how she could prevent disaster. Every vibration of the plane reminded her of the stakes, every blink of the red light a warning. As the runway approached, his gaze locked on the instruments. Speed, descent angle, distance, all critical. She watched the co-pilot adjust flaps, the captain check speed, the blinking warning lights signaling potential failure. The runway loomed larger and tension gripped the cabin. Passengers held their breaths, unaware of the impending danger. His mind worked through every scenario she had studied, every lesson her father had taught her. She could anticipate the potential outcomes: safe landing, overshoot, emergency braking. Her awareness was her weapon, and she clutched it tightly. The plane continued its approach, every second bringing them closer to a critical moment that would test courage, knowledge, and instinct. Took a slow, deliberate breath, focusing on the moment. She scanned the cabin one last time before landing, faces pale, some smiling nervously, some lost in phones or daydreams. She knew that ordinary passengers would freeze if the brakes failed. That thought tightened her resolve. She would not freeze. She would guide, instruct, and intervene if needed. The city below grew ever more detailed, the runway stretching toward them like the line between safety and disaster. His heart thrummed with anticipation, her mind alert and ready. The descent had begun, but the real challenge was yet to come. The wheels touched the tarmac with a shuddering jolt, and passengers clutched their armrests as the plane rolled forward. The familiar resistance of braking was absent. The aircraft didn't slow. Carter's stomach dropped. Around her, nervous murmurs rose into whispers, then into panicked voices. Flight attendants shouted instructions, trying to maintain order, their voices sharp but trembling. The passengers' smiles, their casual conversations, vanished instantly. Fear rippled through the cabin like an electric current, gripping everyone in its unrelenting grasp. Remained calm, her eyes darting to the cockpit, observing the blinking lights and the tense hands of the pilots. The co-pilot's fingers hovered over controls, hesitating. The captain's face was pale, lines of worry etched deep. Recognized the signs: uncertainty, hesitation, and the growing realization that ordinary procedures might fail. The plane was sliding too fast. Every second increased the risk of disaster. Passengers screamed, children cried, and some clutched each other in terror. Training, instincts, and her father's constant emphasis on vigilance surged through her mind. She calculated what needed to happen: emergency brakes, override systems, rapid decision-making. She knew that no one else would act immediately. The pilots were trained, but this was beyond standard procedure. Someone had to take the initiative. His mind raced. She remembered the emergency procedures her father had drilled into her for months. She visualized the cockpit, the switches, the override lever. She imagined herself standing there, guiding the pilot step by step. Every passenger around her was counting on a miracle that no one else could fully provide at that moment. The aircraft hurtled forward, tires squealing against asphalt, sparks flying from friction, the runway flashing past in a terrifying blur. Panic intensified in the cabin. Flight attendants clung to seats, trying to maintain calm, but their own fear seeped through. Had to act. With a sudden clarity, moved decisively from her seat, weaving through rows of screaming passengers. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surging through every vein, but her mind was focused, methodical. She reached the cockpit door and rapped sharply. "Open, I know what to do." The pilots, shocked to see an 18-year-old at their threshold, paused. But the urgency in her voice left no room for hesitation. She didn't need their approval. She needed action, and they recognized it. The cockpit door slid open. His eyes immediately locked onto the emergency brake override. She pointed, her voice steady despite the chaos behind her. "Use that lever. Follow the procedure exactly." The co-pilot's hands trembled, but he nodded, trusting her command. Sparks flew under the tires as friction and speed collided, the plane sliding dangerously close to the end of the runway. Every passenger's eyes were wide, every scream echoing, but focus never wavered. She guided the pilots verbally, step by step, following the mental drills she had rehearsed countless times. The passengers felt the difference almost immediately. The plane's speed decreased, though it was slow and terrifyingly incremental. Screeches of the tires filled the cabin as sparks showered outward, lights flashing across the asphalt. Some passengers screamed louder, terrified by the sudden change, while others clutched each other tightly, holding on to hope. Flight attendants worked furiously to calm everyone, instructing them to stay seated, tighten, and brace for impact. His voice remained calm and precise, cutting through the cacophony. "Emergency brakes now. Step by step, keep steady." Minutes or perhaps seconds stretched into eternity. The runway blurred beneath them. Eyes scanned the instruments, watching the speed gradually decrease, the brake system responding to her instructions and the pilot's cooperation. Sweat ran down her forehead, her fingers gripping the edge of the cockpit console, but her mind remained laser-focused. Around her, chaos raged, but her calm presence and clear directives began to have an effect. The plane's deceleration, once imperceptible, became evident. Every inch mattered, every second counted. Passengers held their breaths. Some closed their eyes, others stared in disbelief. The plane's tail skidded slightly, sparks erupting from the friction between wheels and asphalt. His voice cut through panic. "Almost there, keep it steady, you're doing it." The pilots followed her guidance, activating every available emergency mechanism, adjusting levers and switches with precise timing. The cabin trembled, passengers pressed against their seats, and the plane crept forward, each meter a battle against disaster. The runway seemed impossibly long, yet terrifyingly short. Finally, with a groaning screech, the plane came to a complete stop, just feet from the runway's edge. Silence fell, broken by tentative applause and relieved laughter. Sank back against the console, exhausted, her chest heaving, adrenaline coursing through her body. Flight attendants moved quickly, checking passengers, reassuring them, hugging terrified children, and offering water. The pilots exhaled deeply, expressions of astonishment and relief on their faces. Still steadying herself, allowed a small, weary smile. The danger had passed, but only because she had acted decisively and without hesitation. The cabin erupted into cheers, claps, and tears. Strangers hugged strangers, shaking in disbelief at what had just occurred. This calm, decisive action had saved hundreds of lives. Passengers began murmuring her name, asking who she was, marveling at her courage. Flight attendants and pilots exchanged amazed glances, acknowledging the extraordinary heroism of someone so young. In an ordinary passenger, ordinary clothing, ordinary age, had arisen extraordinary bravery. Sat back finally, exhausted, relief washing over her, aware that in a matter of minutes, catastrophe had been avoided. Outside, emergency crews rushed to inspect the runway and the plane. Sparks had scorched the tarmac, tires bore marks of extreme friction, yet the aircraft remained intact, passengers unharmed. The captain nodded to, voice low but full of respect. "You saved everyone, I can't thank you enough." Shook her head, still processing, trying to catch her breath. She had known it was urgent, had known what to do, and had acted. The passengers, once panicked, now looked at her with awe and gratitude. The ordinary teenager had become a hero in an extraordinary moment. As made her way back to her seat, passengers lined the aisle, shaking her hand, hugging her, thanking her. Children stared wide-eyed, some whispering, "She saved us." The flight attendants whispered congratulations, brushing aside their own terror to honor her courage. Outside the plane, Chicago's skyline glimmered, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded on the runway. Sat down finally, heart still racing, adrenaline fatting slowly, aware that she had faced something few could even imagine, and had emerged as the unlikely hero of the skis. Carter's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the cockpit, the world around her narrowing to the blinking lights and levers before her. The pilots froze for a split second, disbelief and urgency flashing across their faces. An 18-year-old girl standing in the cockpit wasn't part of their training manual, yet her confidence, her calm, precise tone demanded attention. She didn't hesitate. "Emergency brake override," she said firmly, pointing at the lever. "Follow the procedure exactly, step by step. You can do this." The co-pilot's hands trembled over the controls. The plane's speed remained dangerously high, tires screeching against the tarmac. Sparks erupted under the aircraft, the smell of hot rubber and friction filling the cockpit. His mind raced, recalling every detail her father had drilled into her: lever positions, sequences, timing, and coordination. She ignored fear, focusing entirely on action. Around her, the runway blurred, the plane sliding perilously fast toward the edge. She barked instructions, precise and calm. "Check hydraulic pressure, engage override, confirm lever in position." Every second stretched. The co-pilot's hand moved uncertainly, but's clear, commanding tone guided him. The captain adjusted flaps, coordinating with her directions, eyes darting between instruments. Sparks continued to fly, alarms blaring, and the cabin behind them echoed with screams and gasps of terrified passengers. His gaze was steady, unblinking, her brain calculating speed, distance, friction, and time. She visualized each meter, each second, anticipating the plane's movement and giving precise guidance. "Brake lever now, hold steady, don't release." Her voice cut through panic like a lifeline. In the cabin, passengers pressed against their seats, faces pale, knuckles white. Flight attendants struggled to maintain calm, shouting instructions, holding frightened children and urging people to stay seated. His voice seemed to reach them despite the chaos, an invisible anchor of certainty. Her instructions in the cockpit slowed the plane gradually, but the danger was far from over. The speed had decreased just enough to prevent immediate disaster, yet the runway remained short. Every adjustment, every lever, every hand movement mattered. She stayed composed, guiding, calculating, and anticipating. The co-pilot's eyes widened as instructions proved effective. The plane responded incrementally, decelerating despite the system's limitations. Sparks still flew from the tires, smoke curling faintly toward the cockpit windows. Remained focused, her fingers tracing the sequences in her mind, shouting instructions clearly and calmly. "Flaps full, emergency brake engaged, monitor instruments." The captain nodded, working with her, eyes darting between gauges, hands moving decisively. The plane's motion was a delicate balance between disaster and salvation, and held it firmly in her mental grasp. Every meter the plane slowed, confidence grew. She could feel the passengers' collective tension shift, though she couldn't see them directly. Somewhere behind her, a mother whispered reassurances to her child, a businessman muttered prayers, and a teen held tightly to a tablet. His calm determination became a silent force, translating through the cockpit into action, stabilizing the aircraft inch by inch. She ignored fatigue, adrenaline, and fear, focusing entirely on the task: bring the plane safely to a halt. Every blink, every second was accounted for. Sparks erupted louder as the aircraft skidded over the asphalt, friction scorching the runway surface. Alarms continued, each a reminder of the danger still looming. Eyes flicked between the emergency brake lever and the instruments. "Adjust pressure, increase resistance gradually, flap steady," she called. The co-pilot's hands moved with newfound confidence, following her precise directions. The captain mirrored her adjustments, responding to her calm clarity, recognizing that her knowledge, unusual as it was, had become vital. The plane's momentum was finally slowing significantly, though danger still lingered. Time seemed to stretch. Mind ran simulations of every possible outcome, the plane stopping safely, overshooting, colliding with runway obstacles. Each scenario reinforced her instructions. She communicated crisply, decisively, ignoring panic, maintaining focus. Steady, steady, brake lever engaged fully, adjust flaps. Her voice was a lifeline for the crew, a thread of certainty amidst chaos. Outside the cockpit windows, sparks continued to fly, runway lights blurred, the plane's tires screeched. Inside, the cockpit was a symphony of precise movement, guided by intuition and knowledge. Minutes, or what felt like an eternity, passed. The plane's speed dropped significantly. Instructed, calculated, anticipated, and corrected. The co-pilot's hands were steady now, responding confidently to her commands. The captain's brow uncreased as the instruments reflected slowing speed. Every meter was critical, every lever mattered. His mind remained clear, tracking speed, distance, and time with almost mechanical precision. "Almost there. Hold steady," she shouted, guiding them closer to safety. Behind her, passengers clutched seats, eyes wide, still unsure, yet survival was now within reach because of her. Finally, the plane screeched to a complete stop. Sparks still flickered from the friction, but the aircraft had halted mere feet from the runway's end. The cockpit was silent for a moment, tension replaced with stunned relief. Slumped slightly, exhausted, adrenaline slowly fatting, yet she remained alert, ensuring the plane was stable. The co-pilot exhaled deeply, trembling, eyes meeting hers with awe and gratitude. The captain shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and respect in his eyes. "You saved us," he whispered, voice low but sincere. Nodded, too drained for words. Behind her, the cabin erupted. Passengers clapped, cheered, some weeping, some laughing, all grateful. Flight attendants moved swiftly, checking on everyone, offering reassurance, distributing water, and hugging frightened children. Actions had a ripple effect. What began as panic transformed into awe, gratitude, and relief. The plane's danger, once palpable, was now a memory, preserved by the precise and courageous intervention of one remarkably calm and prepared teenager. News of the heroism would travel quickly, but in that moment simply breathed, aware of the lives saved by focus, knowledge, and courage. Outside, emergency crews approached, prepared for the worst but met instead with an aircraft and passengers intact. The captain and co-pilot stepped out slowly, nodding to before assisting passengers. She walked down the aisle, hands trembling slightly from adrenaline, yet every passenger she passed offered words of thanks, awe, and respect. Children stared wide-eyed, whispering about the girl who had saved them. Flight attendants whispered congratulations, shaking their heads at the incredible presence of mind demonstrated by someone so young. Finally allowed herself to exhale fully. Ordinary teenager, extraordinary action. Lives saved. The screech of tires faded into silence, replaced by the heavy, collective breathing of passengers. The plane had stopped. Sparks had ceased, smoke curled faintly from the asphalt, and the emergency alarms were muted. Carter slumped into the co-pilot's seat for a moment, her body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion, yet her mind remained alert, scanning instruments to ensure nothing was still wrong. Around her, the cockpit was a mixture of disbelief, relief, and awe. The captain exhaled deeply, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're stable. You did it," he said quietly, voice thick with respect. The cabin was a chaotic contrast of relief and lingering panic. Flight attendants moved with purpose, checking on every passenger, offering water, comforting children, and ensuring no one had injuries. Mothers hugged terrified toddlers, business travelers muttered prayers, and teenagers whispered disbelief to each other. Moved slowly down the aisle, still catching her breath. Eyes followed her as she passed, wide, amazed, grateful. Strangers whispered, "She saved us. That girl." Each acknowledgement tugged at her, yet she remained calm, letting the relief in the cabin settle. She could feel the transformation from terror to safety, every soul aboard now aware of the extraordinary intervention that had preserved them. Emergency crews approached the aircraft. their vehicles rolling onto the tarmac with flashing lights and urgent urgency. They scanned the plane carefully, inspecting tires, brakes, and the fuselage. Smoke trailed gently from the rear wheels, marking the path of friction and fire that had nearly ended the flight in disaster. Passengers peeked nervously through windows as firefighters and paramedics circled the aircraft, remained seated momentarily, quietly monitoring the situation. The cabin, now less chaotic, hummed with murmurs of disbelief and awe. Flight attendants whispered thanks to her, shaking their heads, amazed at the presence of mind and composure she had maintained under pressure. Outside, the runway bore the marks of emergency action: scorched asphalt, blackened tire tracks, and scattered sparks remnants. The co-pilot shook his head, awestruck, repeating, "I can't believe it. An 18-year-old." The captain nodded silently, realizing the gravity of the situation. Had not only guided them but had executed mental calculations and emergency maneuvers that few professionals could have managed in real time. Her father's lessons, months of preparation, simulations, and warnings, had crystallized into perfect, real-world application. Ordinary knowledge had transformed into extraordinary action. Passengers began to emerge from their seats, cautious but relieved. Mothers held trembling children close, teenagers whispered in awe, and older passengers muttered about never seeing anything like that. Flight attendants coordinated exits calmly, but their hands shook slightly, still processing the near disaster they had witnessed. Stood at the front, catching her breath, her eyes scanning each row. She noted a few minor scrapes from buckling and nervous jolts, but nothing severe. Relief washed over her as she realized that, thanks to her intervention, the plane had avoided catastrophe entirely. A young boy ran up the aisle to her, wide-eyed. "You saved us," he said, gripping her hand, smiled softly, kneeling to meet him at eye level. "We all stayed calm, okay?" she said gently, though the truth was she had taken action where most would have frozen. Other passengers now approached her, shaking her hand, thanking her repeatedly. A mother whispered, "I don't know how to thank you, you saved my child." His heart swelled with the realization that she had, against all odds, become the hero of the flight. Every step she had taken, every decision she had made, had mattered profoundly. The pilot stepped out of the cockpit finally, nodding to with solemn respect. "You were extraordinary," the captain said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "Without your guidance, we don't want to think about it." Shook her head, still overwhelmed. She had acted because she knew the steps, because she had prepared, because she had remained calm. But the reality of the lives she had preserved, hundreds of them, slowly sank in. Passengers were whispering stories of her courage already, their awe spreading like wildfire through the cabin. Emergency crews inspected the plane thoroughly, giving it a clean bill of safety. Smoke dissipated, sparks vanished, and the asphalt bore only the faint scars of friction. Passengers were allowed to disembark slowly, some still clutching their loved ones, others shaking hands with as they left the aircraft. Flight attendants coordinated everyone efficiently, now with relief replacing their earlier fear. Finally stepped onto the tarmac, the evening air cool against her flushed face. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had just occurred settle over her shoulders. She had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious. Media crews had already begun arriving, drawn by reports of a near disaster at R. Passengers shared their stories, eyes wide, voices trembling, and reporters quickly picked up the tale of a young girl whose composure and quick thinking had saved the flight. Remained humble, answering questions softly, insisting that she had just followed what she knew. Flight attendants and pilots spoke on her behalf, reinforcing the fact that her calmness and decisive action had truly been extraordinary. What began as fear had ended in awe, gratitude, and profound admiration. As watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and pink, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. She had faced fear, chaos, and mechanical failure, all while remaining composed and effective. Around her, passengers shared their relief, reuniting with loved ones, shaking hands and whispering thanks. Emergency crews completed their inspections, satisfied with the plane's safety. Flight attendants gave her small smiles, nodding in recognition, and the pilots offered a final look of respect and gratitude. Allowed herself a small smile, aware that her presence of mind had made the difference between disaster and survival. Even as passengers departed, her story was already spreading. Conversations buzzed with amazement, whispers of the teenage girl who had saved hundreds of lives, and murmurs of how calmness, preparation, and courage had triumphed over chaos. Finally exhaled fully, leaning against the plane as her father's lessons resonated in her mind. Awareness matters, preparation matters, courage matters. That day, every one of them had been given a second chance, and it had been focus and decisiveness that had secured it. By the next morning, Carter's name was everywhere. News outlets across the country had picked up the story. The 18-year-old girl who had saved hundreds of lives during a harrowing emergency landing at our international airport. Social media buzzed with headlines and videos of the plane's tire-scorched runway, passengers, relieved faces, and snippets of interviews with grateful travelers and astonished crew members. She had gone to bed the night before as an ordinary teenager, but she woke to a nation calling her a hero. The weight of it was almost surreal. School friends, teachers, and neighbors flooded her phone with congratulations, disbelief, and pride. Still processing the previous day's events, scrolled through messages, her chest tightening. The flight attendants, pilots, and emergency crews had shared their stories with the press, ensuring her bravery received the recognition it deserved. The co-pilot's interview described her actions with awe. She remained calm, decisive, and knowledgeable. She didn't hesitate. Honestly, she saved all of us. The captain, usually reserved and composed, had called her courage extraordinary beyond belief. His father, watching news coverage in the living room, couldn't hold back tears. "I taught her to notice details, to stay aware, to prepare," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But even I never imagined she would apply it like this in real life. She was calm, focused, incredible." The family received calls from local reporters, national news networks, and even aviation organizations, all eager to hear from the girl who had expectations. Answered as best she could, modest and composed, insisting she had just stayed aware and did what I thought needed to be done. Yet deep down she understood the truth. She had been extraordinary. The flight's passengers came forward with stories of her bravery. Mothers spoke of how her calm voice, instructions, and presence had prevented panic from spreading through the cabin. A businessman recounted gripping his seat, watching her stride toward the cockpit, and realizing that someone had taken control of a terrifying situation. Families praised her humility and focus. News anchors replayed footage of the plane stopping just meters from the end of the runway, highlighting the near catastrophe and her role in preventing disaster. Her story inspired awe nationwide. Aviation organizations quickly took notice. Emergency landing protocols were being discussed in seminars and conferences, and its intervention became a case study in calm decision-making under pressure. Pilots and instructors marveled at her presence of mind, noting that even highly trained professionals might hesitate in the face of a malfunctioning braking system. Her methodical approach, memorized procedures, and assertive communication had not only stabilized the plane, but had also demonstrated the power of awareness and preparation in life-or-death scenarios. Was invited to interviews, award ceremonies, and school assemblies. Each time, she emphasized that preparation, observation, and focus were as important as courage. She remained humble, crediting her father's guidance and her own awareness rather than claiming innate heroism. The public, however, was captivated. News articles described her as the teenage hero who saved a plane and Carter, the girl who stopped disaster. Social media users shared posts celebrating her bravery, calling her an inspiration for young people and adults alike. Her life, once ordinary, had become a beacon of courage and calm under pressure. Despite the media frenzy, remained grounded. She attended school, interacted with friends, and tried to maintain normalcy. But the story followed her everywhere. People recognized her on the street, applauded her in classrooms, and sent letters expressing gratitude. Airlines began inviting her to speak about safety awareness and preparedness, recognizing the practical lessons her actions had demonstrated. His face appeared on television screens across the nation, but she remained focused, thoughtful, and unpretentious. She had acted when it mattered most. The recognition was simply a reflection of that truth. The flight crew maintained contact with and her family, ensuring that their gratitude and admiration were expressed personally. Pilots, flight attendants, and passengers alike wrote letters praising her courage. Some called her a miracle, others a role model, but all emphasized the calm determination that had prevented tragedy. Reading these letters, felt a profound sense of connection to the lives she had impacted. Each message was a reminder of the responsibility she had borne in those moments on the runway. She had acted, but she had also inspired, showing that courage and clarity could change outcomes dramatically. As the weeks passed, Story became part of broader discussions about emergency preparedness, youth empowerment, and the importance of staying calm in crises. Schools incorporated her story into safety lessons, emphasizing observation, preparation, and decisive action. Pilots referenced her approach in training simulations. National organizations commended her, awarding certificates and medals for bravery and service to the community. Life had shifted dramatically, yet she remained herself. Modest, thoughtful, and aware of the extraordinary opportunity, she had to influence others through her actions. The narrative of the 18-year-old girl who saved a plane resonated deeply with people across the country. Media outlets continued to follow her story, showing interviews, classroom visits, and reunions with passengers. Social media trends featured hashtags praising her courage, with thousands sharing personal reflections on how her actions inspired calm and confidence. For the attention was surreal, yet she understood one fundamental truth: her preparedness, observation, and courage had made the difference. She had not sought fame, but she had earned respect, admiration, and gratitude that would endure far beyond that fateful day. Story became more than just a tale of heroism. It was a lesson in vigilance, in calmness under pressure, and in the extraordinary power of preparation. From ordinary beginnings, an ordinary teenager had become a symbol of courage and clarity. Families, children, and professionals looked to her example, inspired to act decisively in the face of danger. Her journey had been terrifying, exhausting, and exhilarating, but it had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Carter, the girl who had saved a plane, was now a name known, respected, and remembered across the nation. The months following the emergency landing at R had transformed Carter's life in ways she could hardly have imagined. Where once she had walked the hallways of her high school unnoticed, now teachers, classmates, and even strangers recognized her. Her story was told in classrooms, newspapers, and television segments. Every conversation seemed to start with, "You're the girl who saved the plane, right?" At first, the attention was overwhelming, a constant reminder of the extraordinary day that had changed everything. Yet approached it with the same calm clarity that had saved lives: humility, awareness, and purpose. Its daily routine shifted subtly. Mornings began early, not with ordinary teenage distractions, but with reflection and preparation. She took time to meditate, organize her schoolwork, and review mental exercises in situational awareness, lessons she had honed for the flight that day. Her father continued to guide her, providing wisdom on decision-making, focus, and resilience. Though had demonstrated remarkable courage in the cockpit, she now realized that heroism wasn't just about one moment of action. It was about consistent preparation, responsibility, and the willingness to remain calm under pressure. Despite the whirlwind of fame, remained grounded. She returned to school, quietly resuming her studies, though with a subtle shift in perspective. Each lesson she learned, each interaction with classmates or teachers, now carried a sense of purpose. She engaged more deeply in discussions, observed the world around her more closely, and offered guidance when needed. Friends marveled at her composure and insight, often asking how she had remained so calm in the face of such life-threatening danger. Would smile gently, answering, "I focused on what I could control and prepared for what might happen." News outlets continued to follow her story. Interviews, podcasts, and television segments sought perspective on heroism, crisis management, and preparedness. She shared her experiences thoughtfully, emphasizing lessons that could empower others. Her emphasis was never on fame but on awareness and courage. "Preparation matters more than luck," she told one interviewer. "Knowing what to do, staying calm, and acting decisively can save lives." Everyone has the potential to act when it counts, even if they don't realize it yet. Her words resonated with people of all ages, inspiring parents, students, and professionals alike. Also began speaking at local schools and community centers, discussing emergency preparedness, situational awareness, and mental resilience. Her presentations were simple but powerful. Focus on observation, understand your surroundings, and trust your instincts when necessary. Children listened wide-eyed as she recounted the events of the flight in a careful, measured way, emphasizing the importance of preparation without creating fear. Parents expressed gratitude for the lessons she shared, and teachers noted how her example encouraged students to take responsibility for their safety and awareness. In these moments, discovered another kind of fulfillment, inspiring others to be brave and prepared. The flight crew maintained a close connection with, frequently checking in and expressing their continued gratitude. The captain invited her to aviation safety conferences, and the co-pilot consulted her on new emergency protocols, acknowledging the unique perspective she had offered. Insight, rooted not in formal training but in preparation, observation, and composure, was now influencing professional aviation practices. She had become not just a hero, but a symbol of practical courage, demonstrating that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when circumstances demanded it. At home, as parents watched their daughter grow into a young woman shaped by experience and reflection. Her father often reminded her that the traits that had saved hundreds of lives were also the traits that would guide her in the years ahead: awareness, calmness, and decisiveness. Internalized these lessons deeply. She recognized that her actions on the plane were extraordinary, yes, but they were rooted in preparation and careful observation, qualities she could apply in school, relationships, and future challenges. Heroism, she realized, was not just a moment but a mindset. As the one-year anniversary of the emergency flight approached, Chicago celebrated her courage. Commemorative articles, interviews, and a small ceremony recognized publicly. She accepted modest accolades, her words highlighting the collective effort: the pilots, the flight attendants, the emergency crews, and even the passengers who had remained calm. Reminded the audience that bravery is accessible to anyone who prepares and acts with clarity. Her story, once a singular event, had now become a beacon of practical heroism, teaching people across the country that courage and awareness are as important as physical strength or formal training. Life continued to evolve in remarkable ways. She became an advocate for aviation safety, youth empowerment, and crisis preparedness. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and mentored younger students, encouraging them to develop observation, resilience, and decision-making skills. Her story, though extraordinary, was grounded in the idea that preparation and awareness make heroism achievable. Never sought recognition, but she embraced the opportunity to teach others that courage is a combination of knowledge, calm, and decisive action. Through it all, remained a teenager with dreams, friendships, and ordinary challenges. Yet the extraordinary day at R had transformed her perspective forever. She had learned that fear could be managed, chaos could be navigated, and preparation could save lives. The girl who had stopped a plane from disaster had also learned to stop and reflect, to guide others, and to recognize the power of composure in the face of crisis. Her courage had rippled far beyond the tarmac that day, inspiring countless individuals to trust in themselves, act decisively, and prepare for the unexpected. Carter, once an ordinary 18-year-old, had become a living example of bravery, focus, and preparation. Her story continued to circulate, inspiring a nation, shaping safety practices, and influencing young minds. She had faced fear, acted decisively, and emerged not just as a hero of the skis, but as a symbol of practical courage and resilience. And as she looked toward the future, understood that heroism was not about being fearless. It was about observing, preparing, and acting when it mattered most. That lesson, she knew, would guide her for the rest of her life.